herein do not represent the views of the committee or the Magna Carta Trust. Usually they say do not necessarily represent, but they say no, they do not represent. In fact, the idea is this. You see, while in 1215 in England we were producing Magna Carta, over here in Rome, the Pope, Innocent III, was setting up the machinery for the Holy Inquisition. Now, Magna Carta restricted the power of the authorities over the individual in ways which I will explain in a minute. The Inquisition increased, expanded and deepened these powers immensely. And in fact, when the Pope found out what had happened at Runnymede, he was very angry, and he wrote very rude letters to the English bishops and abbots who had signed it, saying they had done something abominable and illicit. And in fact, at that time, there was a divergence. Our paths took two different directions. In relations, the concept of relations between the citizen and the state, and criminal procedure, which is very important, because it's within criminal procedure that the state has the handle for using physical force, physical violence over the bodies of the citizens. It means police and prisons. And in fact, I have this book by the late, great Professor Italo Mereu of Ferrara University, who wrote this book and various other books, and 30 years ago, in Florence, where he lived, I had the pleasure of meeting him and went to his house too. And this book is called Storia dell'intolleranza in Europa, Sospettare e punire, to suspect and to punish. Because with the Inquisition, what happened was, if you were suspected, you were arrested and put in prison. And then they tortured you to make you confess, basically. But in England, it was different. Also, there was the main innovation of the Inquisition was they took the figure of the prosecutor, the investigator, and the prosecutor, it was the same person, and the judge, and they rolled them up into one, the inquisitor, who investigated, prosecuted, gave the verdict, gave the sentence. This meant that if you got into his bad books, you were in deep trouble, because you didn't have a third party, impartial third party, to make the judgment. Now, what happened with Magna Carta? Well, Magna Carta is famous to this day, especially for clauses 39 and 40. Clause 39 says, no free man shall be trampled upon, or imprisoned, or exiled, or have his goods seized, or all the different kinds of punishment were listed, save by judgment of his peers and the law of the land. Now, judgment of his peers meant ordinary people like him. Of course, if he was a baron, then it was barons. If he was a nobleman, it was other nobles, members of the House of Lords. This was still used until about the 1930s, that they could insist on being tried in the House of Lords. There's an anecdote on that, but I won't tell you now. And this meant that the state no longer had the power to say, you are going to prison. No, they couldn't do it. It had to be 12 ordinary people, like the defendant, his peers, people equal to him, who decided guilty or not guilty. And this was a revolutionary concept. Now, Clause 40 says that to no man shall we deny, delay, or sell justice. The bit about not delaying justice means that situations where you spend long months awaiting in prison, awaiting justice, are not on. They are not allowed. That is considered wrong. Now, these basic concepts, that the power of the state must be limited, and that people cannot be sent to prison without a judgment of their peers, travelled across the oceans. It reached the United States. In fact, the Americans are mad keen about Magna Carta. It was the American Bar Association that paid for the monument, which marks the spot in Runnymede where it was signed. They have a copy of it in their on the hall of the Capitol, on the wall, and it is considered a founding document of the American Constitution, an inspiration. And of course the British Commonwealth, and here we are in the Commonwealth Club, so I think the matter is particularly pertinent. Now, Australia, New Zealand, telling me just before that there's a copy in Canberra in Australia, and in Canada too. They are in the English-speaking lands of the world. The Magna Carta is not only respected but also applied. And then there is one more clause which I want to mention, which is not talked about, because in England people think it's obvious. It's I think, a very important clause. It's clause 38. I will give it to you in the Latin, but don't worry, I will translate it into English. Nullus balivus, which means no bailiff or no legal officer, ponat, shall put, decetero, or over. Aliquem ad legem, anyone to law, in other words, they can't start legal proceedings against anybody. Simplici sua loquela, just on his own say-so. Sine testibus fidelibus, without reliable witnesses. Ad hoc adductis, brought for the purpose. It's very important to say, adductis is the past participle, not the future participle. Because, well, now this clause is considered obvious. You don't arrest people and start prosecuting them or start giving them a hard time if you've got no evidence. Mere clues or mere suspicion is not enough. I mean, this is considered obvious in the English-speaking world. But not, well, Magna Carta crossed the oceans, but it didn't cross the Channel. What happened with the Inquisition? Well, the Inquisition spread all over Europe. Only England was really spared because of Magna Carta. And it devastated people for centuries in practically all of continental Europe. And then, of course, you had then the French Revolution, which turned everything upside down. But it was soon taken in hand by Napoleon. And Napoleon made some laws. His codes are still the basis of modern continental Italian, French, etc. legal systems in Europe today. And there, Napoleon did not adopt the English system. He kept the essence of the inquisitorial method. He adapted it, he adopted it, and adapted it, no longer for the service of the church, of true religion, but the service of the state. And you still had a very close connection between the accuser and the judge. And what's more, you had the judge, the professional career judges, which you have here, and in France and in other European countries, are the ones who gather, conduct the investigation. They present the prosecution, and they give the verdict and the sentence. And they decide a lot of other things too. Whereas in the English system, these functions are not in the hands of a single body. You see, here in Italy in particular, you have the career judiciary, which includes prosecutors, pubblici ministeri, and judges, giudici, who sit in the various kinds of court. And they are part of the same career, and there have been attempts by some politicians to separate the career, so at least you had that semblance of tripartite trial. You had a prosecutor and a defender and the judge, who was somebody different from the prosecutor. But there have been tremendous resistance by the judiciary to any attempt to separate the careers. In fact, Berlusconi, who had a large majority in Parliament, was not able to do it. So the system today used in continental Europe is in fact called, it's based on Napoleonic codes, and it calls itself Sistema Inquisitorio, the inquisitorial system. They did have a reform in 1989 of the Code of Criminal Procedure, and I took part in the debate. I published an article about it in a law journal here, which was actually quoted in the Senate by Franco Corleone, who later went on to become Undersecretary for Justice in the subsequent government. But they didn't touch the powers of the career judiciary. I interviewed Giuliano Vassalli, who was the president of the Senate's Justice Commission, which had handled the basic law upon which the new code was to be written, and later he became Minister of Justice, and then he went on to become the president of the Constitutional Court. And he was a grand figure, and I asked him, why in the reform of the procedure you changed some of the rules, but you haven't powers of the judiciary as such? And he said, they wouldn't let us. I said, who wouldn't let you? The judiciary wouldn't let us. And I said, but what about the sovereignty of Parliament? And he said, oh, well, we have a sort of limited sovereignty here, like, well, that was of course a reference to the Brezhnev doctrine, whereby when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, and people said, well, what about Czechoslovakia's sovereignty? Brezhnev said, oh, they have limited sovereignty in the Warsaw Pact. So that was the situation. Now, the